Good morning. It's September 13th, and in case you're wondering, yes, I did support local art yesterday.
This is
Next book on the favorites list is Paper Towns 2. That's not all.
Say hi.
Well, it's time for another Movie Monday. Now, last week we took a look at one of my all-time favorite movies, V for Vendetta, and so it seems only fair that this week we should take a look at a movie that doesn't quite measure up. Earlier this year, Fox released Percy Jackson and the Olympians: The Lightning Thief, based on the now famous children's fantasy series by Rick Riordan. Now, as it happens, this 5-book fantasy series is, in my opinion, one of the best children's fantasy series to come out in recent years. While the movie is honestly pretty standard. Not bad, I mean it's a good movie and it definitely kept me entertained, but as far as a comparison to the book, it's not worth going the full books versus movie route. This is another review of shame. Now there might be a misperception on your part that reviews of shame are always going to be about bad books and bad movies, and that's certainly not the case here. I'll admit, when I saw some of the trailers, I was a little worried about how much I was going to enjoy this movie, but quite honestly, I found it decently entertaining. I really did enjoy it while I was watching it. But then I started thinking about it in terms of a books versus movies review, and honestly, every category I could possibly come up with, the book won. So let's take a look at some of the reasons why this version of Percy Jackson and the Olympians just doesn't hold up. Reason number 1, the characters. Now, first of all, let me say that I'm not talking about Percy Jackson. I thought that the kid who played Percy Jackson was terrific. Even though Logan Lerman might be a little bit too old for the role, I felt like he really nailed the personality. He's so good at not being able to stand still that you really don't need the awkward exposition lines about him having ADD. And I love his expressions and his reactions throughout this whole story. He never stops being completely blown away by what he's seeing.
Wow.
There are some other characters that are done well too, but unfortunately Percy is the only one that's really well developed and analyzed. The Grover in the movie is completely changed from the Grover in the book. First of all, the Grover in the book is a complete loser. I mean, he has no coolness factor at all. Whereas this Grover is the king of cool. Unfortunately, he's also very much the token black sidekick. We've seen this character in dozens of other movies. I mean, he even says, at the beginning. How much more stereotypical could you get? Similarly, Annabeth is reduced to the typical brainy, tough girl that the main hero has a crush on. Basically what they did with both of these characters is they took away all the aspects of their characters from the book that made them interesting. Especially Annabeth. Annabeth has a lot of baggage in the book. That and other aspects of her character, largely for reasons I'll discuss later, are completely eliminated in the movie, and she's basically just a cardboard cutout of a typical heroine. The movie also eliminated a lot of great characters from the book series, like Clarice, the daughter of Ares. And I understand why they had to do this, and again, it's for reasons I'll discuss later, but these are just such interesting characters, it seems a shame to drop them. And then we have Hades, and you know what? Hades is so irritating to me, it gets its own category. Reason number 2, Hades. Okay, any of you who are considering writing stories based on Greek mythology, I'll only say this once. Actually, I'll probably say it more than once, but for now I'll only say it once. Hades is not synonymous with hell. This movie used Hades and hell interchangeably throughout the movie, and it really started to bother me. In Greek mythology, Hades is the afterlife, the house of the dead. It has its own versions of heaven, hell, and purgatory. Everyone who dies goes to Hades, not just the bad people. Similarly, Hades the god is not synonymous with the devil. He's simply the overseer of the underworld, but he's not evil. He's a dark character to be sure, and he definitely has moments of cruelty, but what character from Greek mythology doesn't? As far as story goes, probably the biggest change they made from the book series is that they made Hades into a bad guy. And I gotta tell you, this is one of my Greek mythology pet peeves. Also, take a look at how they depict Hades. I mean, could you get more stereotypical if you tried? All that's missing is a bunch of red-skinned demons with forked tails and horns running around jumping in your face going boogity boogity. Now don't get me wrong, I actually really like the way this actor depicts Hades. It's not the characterization that bothers me, it's his role in the story. In the book, it's assumed that Hades would be a bad guy at the beginning, but then they learn very quickly that he's not. And Hades isn't a fiery pit of hell, it's a waiting room. Would it have killed the movie to be a little bit more subtle on this point? And finally, reason number 3, the story. Now the story that they tell in the movie is not a bad one. It's nothing like the story in the book, but it's not a bad one. However, I'm noting that with a lot of these new children's fantasy movies that Hollywood seems to be falling into a syndrome, and it's a syndrome I like to refer to as, we want to remake the success of the Harry Potter series, but not really. Basically, children's fantasy novels are a huge market right now. First, it's going to bring a lot of families into movie theaters, a lot of kids are going to know these stories, and maybe most importantly, it allows for a lot of great visual opportunities for movies. And I will say that Percy Jackson and the Olympians is very visually interesting. I really like Chris Columbus's direction, and I think he did a great job with the look of this world. But the other part of the syndrome I mentioned is the but not really part. The other aspect of the Harry Potter series is the fact that it is 7 and actually now 8 movies long, which is quite frankly exhausting, to say nothing of the fact that you have to find child actors who are going to be with it for the long haul and who are still going to look like the characters when they're grown. That's a lot of work for something that may or may not be successful after the first film. And it seems like children's fantasy movies are starting to do that increasingly lately. I saw this with Inkheart, which closed up a lot of loose ends that weren't closed up in the book, just so the movie could stand on its own. And to be perfectly honest, I don't think they ever intended to make the other 2 books into movies, just the first one. And I think the same can be said here, because they eliminated every aspect of the book that made it look as though this was a part of something bigger. Anything that was part of the overarching series storyline was eliminated in the movie. Which is partly why the interesting aspects of Annabeth's character were also eliminated. They had to do with her overall character development throughout the series. And while I don't have a problem with this per se, it does mean that there are a lot of plot holes in the movie. First of all, the explanation to why everybody assumes that Percy Jackson is the lightning thief is never really developed in the movie. And this is because in the book, the big 3, meaning Zeus, Poseidon, and Hades, are forbidden from procreating with mortals anymore because their offspring are simply too powerful. And Percy Jackson represents a transgression of this law on the part of Poseidon, and so naturally everybody hates him. In the movie, the law is simply that the gods are forbidden from visiting their offspring, which really doesn't explain why everybody hates Percy so much. And just in general, it made the movie story a lot less complex to make it stand on its own like this. That's why the characters are cardboard cutouts and why Hades has to be the bad guy, because there's no overarching storyline for future movies. And while, as I said, I really don't have a problem with this, it does mean that the book is simply better. The book is a page-turner because you get the feeling as you're reading it that this is a part of something huge. My final verdict on the movie is that it's good, but not great. I love the visuals, and even though the characters in the story are oversimplified, they were still entertaining and enjoyable. It's a nice, entertaining, family-friendly film. But as far as comparing it to the book series, it doesn't even compare. So that's my review of Percy Jackson and the Olympians. Be sure to ask questions if you have not already for Question Tuesday tomorrow, which is when I will next see you.